Hello, my name is Sean McDermott. I am a certified financial planner with LPL Financial. I'm here with Rana Gilbert from Janus Labs team from Denver, Colorado. Rana has been invited into the office today to share her expertise in a program called Energy for Performance, which helps people to manage energy to produce extraordinary results in life. Through Janus Labs, Janus offers research-based tools to help financial advisors like me in a variety of ways, including health and wellness. As an advisor, I believe it's important you invest in good financial, physical, and mental health for a happy and full retirement. Research today has learned that by studying elite athletes and working with corporate executives, skillfully managing both physical and mental energy in sports and business can take you to the next level of performance. The presentation today is going to focus on how to train in 4 dimensions for extraordinary results. Let me turn it over to Rana to tell us more about the program.
Thanks, Sean. It's nice to be here today, and this is a topic that's really important to our hearts, so really thrilled to see that you wanted to introduce this topic and get this content to your clients as well, because this is really information that anybody can benefit from. And really, for us, thinking about this program and putting it together, one of the things that we went back and looked at was just this idea that most of us, especially working professionals, but really just busy people, think that we need more time. Everybody would like more time in their day. Wouldn't you like more time in your day?
Would love to have it.
Unfortunately, I can't necessarily give you more time, but what I can do is give you more energy. And if you think about the fact that time is finite, but our energy really isn't, we can renew our energy. So where we can really become extraordinary and be productive is when we can learn how to manage our energy and renew ourselves to get more energy. So in the end, it may actually give you more time because you're going to be more effective and more efficient.
I see.
So we created this program in partnership with a really unique organization called the Human Performance Institute. And they started in business about 30 years ago, really working with elite athletes. And their challenge was to help athletes who frankly should have been at the top of their game, but for some reason something was keeping them from getting there. And in most cases what they found is it really had very little to do with their physical sport, but it was something else that was happening. So over the course of time in working with athletes, HPI realized there were some lessons we could apply, frankly, to the rest of the world, to the rest of us, in terms of how we can better just manage our time, manage our productivity, manage our energy to be more productive. So there are a few key lessons that we've learned from working with athletes that we can apply to the rest of us. One of those, first and foremost, is that if you think about athletes, they measure everything. And I understand you like to golf. Mm-hmm. So I'm guessing there's probably a little measurement that you do and you're keeping track of your golf game, right?
We have this thing called golf handicap, unfortunately.
Exactly. So you can take that same approach to everything in life and being intentional in how you measure your success and measure your improvement. So another thing we learned with athletes is that they're very repetitious, and it's repetition that builds habits. And if you really think about it, athletes, especially professional athletes, elite athletes, spend 80 if not 90% of their time practicing and maybe only 10% of their time performing. Whereas the rest of us in our everyday lives don't really have that luxury, right? For the most part, we're performing, we're on call all the time, and we don't devote nearly enough time to practice. But there are some things that you can do, and I'm going to give you some tips to build some practice to enable yourself to be more productive and to be more effective.
Good, excellent.
So one of the things that you'd like to get the bad news out first is this idea that, frankly, we're in a little bit of an energy an energy crisis as human beings. And research tells us that after the age of 30, we start to decline both mentally and physically. And while nobody likes to hear that, it is part of the reality. And in particular, after the age of 30, we lose about 10% of our muscle mass every decade. But the good news is there are things that we can do to combat that, and it's through training, it's through that repetition that I talked about earlier. So what we learned in working with HPI is there are four primary forms of energy. And when you can really focus in on what are the things that you can do to help improve in each of those areas, that's when you can become especially productive and especially elite in whatever it is that you're trying to pursue. But understanding those four primary forms is really the place to start. So those really consist of physical energy, and that's truly the foundation. If you think of this in terms of a pyramid, you're going to see physical energy at the bottom, and that just comes into how much energy do you have throughout the day, okay? Then the next one is emotional, and your emotional energy really gets at your ability to manage your emotions. And that comes into play particularly in stressful situations. Do you see things as positive versus negative? And how well can you manage your emotions under stress? The third level is mental. And that starts to get at this idea of how well can you focus? How well can you be present? You hear a lot of people talk about time management, and time management is what might get you physically to a meeting, but that doesn't mean you're physically or you're mentally in that meeting. You know, I think we've all been guilty of that at some point in time. I don't know if you've ever done that, but be in a meeting or maybe even having a conversation with your spouse or a friend, but your mind is somewhere else. Your ability to train to be very present at that time is part of managing that mental energy. And then the last form is spiritual. And spiritual means a lot of things to a lot of different people, but really it's just this idea of, can you connect to a bigger purpose? Is there something that gets you out of bed every day? What drives your energy so that you can be more intentional in how you'd like to spend your energy?
Interesting. Good stuff.
Thank you. So I talked about multitasking, and I think this is one that it's a hard lesson for people to hear, but that we need to focus on focus. Multitasking, there are studies that show that multitasking literally dumbs down our brain. And in order to be truly present, we need to be paying attention to really what's most important to us at that time. And you know, sometimes multitasking can be fine if there's no negative consequences potentially. So doing the laundry while you're watching TV, sure, go ahead and multitask all you want in that respect. But how about, you know, maybe when you're on the phone with an important client? Might not be the time you want to multitask, right? You might not want to be reading an email with a joke from a friend on your screen while you're talking to a client. Because
I think we're all a little bit guilty of that.
We all are, absolutely. And I think this is a hard lesson for people to hear, but knowing that if you want to truly focus on what's important to you at that moment, it's obviously going to be your client. So giving them your full energy at that time. So that's a little bit on multitasking. So another thing that we learned from HPI in working with athletes is this idea that we need both stress and recovery in order to grow. So if you think about, you probably work out, I'm guessing, and do a little exercise, and you know the fundamental is you need to stress your muscles in order to help them grow, right? So if I do 15 bicep curls with the same weight over and over again, eventually I won't see any improvement in my muscle growth, correct? Mm-hmm. So it's the same thing with all those other dimensions that I talked about. We need to be stressing ourselves in order to grow. So I think most of us think of stress as a very negative thing. We have negative connotations with stress, but the fact is stress is inevitable, but it also is important to us. It's how we manage stress and recover from stress that helps us to grow. So one of the things we talk about in this program is this idea of storms. And storms are really just things that take us completely out of our comfort zone. So it could be a big change, it could be a positive thing, but it could be a change in a job. It could be selling a home, buying a new home, becoming an empty nester for the first time, perhaps. Mm-hmm. They're all positive, they're things that you will benefit from, but at the time, it feels very much like a storm. So how you're able to actually maintain and react to that storm. So if you think about going back to this idea of athletes, mm-hmm. why do some athletes perform well under pressure while others crumble? And it's really this idea of being able to manage through your storms and being able to learn from them and grow from them.
Mm-hmm. And I can see how some of my clients could end up going through storms with job change, with retirement planning,
Absolutely.
or if they're having kids or
mm-hmm.
a sick spouse. So
Life is a storm. I mean, it really is. Life is a series of storms. And I think one of the things that I found so great about this program is recognizing that they don't have to be negative. You can acknowledge that you're going through stress, but then keeping your eye sort of on the prize, you know, what's going to be happen, what's the positive thing that's going to come as a result of this, and just having reminders about that it's not going to be, you're not going to be feeling the way you feel all the time. But then also making sure that you take time for recovery. If you're going through a big life change, you might want to think about maybe scheduling a little time off at the end of that life change if you can, or doing something fun, something that's going to take your brain off of some of these things that you're focusing on, right? So you're right. Every single one of us experience storms.
All for that.
All throughout our lives. Absolutely, absolutely. So then the next thing that we learned working with athletes is this concept that we're creatures of habit. And I was pretty fascinated by this when I came across the studies that say that almost 95% of what we do on a daily basis is completely unconscious. We don't even think about it. So if you think about your routine in the morning, you know, the way you brush your teeth, even maybe the process in which you go to, the order in which, you know, you get up, you have your coffee, you have your breakfast, you read the, you know, whatever your schedule is, We all become, and it's because we're trying to be very efficient. Our bodies are meant to be efficient, so we become extremely efficient over time. So what elite athletes are able to do is take that 5% that we know we need that's more intentional and focus their efforts, their energies very intentionally so that they can improve themselves. So it's the same concept that we can all apply to our lives, which is what are those habits? What are those things that we can put in place so that they eventually become a habit? It eventually becomes something we have to work on for a while, but next thing you know, it becomes a habit. So I don't know about you. I'm a morning workout person and never used to be, was never a morning person, but found that that was my ritual because if I didn't, it didn't happen. So now I know if I go and I get up on a day that I just decide not to work out, I don't quite feel right because it's become part of my habit. So putting in place those rituals that eventually become habits.
Mm-hmm.
So in looking at the base of the pyramid, so I'm going to focus mostly on the base because it really is the foundation, and it's hard to move into the other areas if you haven't really gotten the physical piece really in check. And it's not to say that there's perfection, nobody's going to be perfect, but really thinking about your physical energy and what does that mean? Well, physical energy is really going to come from food and movement are going to be the two primary forces of your physical energy. So if we look at food, there's really a really important way to think of this, and it goes back to thousands of years ago. You know, what were the opportunities and threats that were presented to us as human beings? And we haven't really evolved much, quite frankly. So it used to be that we were in a feast or famine most of the time, and so our bodies were looking for ways to conserve energy and then find ways to give you bursts of energy when you needed it. So when you needed to pursue food or frankly keep yourself out of harm's way. So that is what we talk about in today's world. A lot of people do what we call survival-based eating. And it goes back to those old days. And so do you eat breakfast in the morning?
I do have a good breakfast every morning.
Good for you. Okay, because a lot of people don't. So one easy thing to remember is that you should always eat something within an hour of getting up in the morning. And what you're trying to do is keep your blood level, your glucose level in your blood consistent. And glucose is simply just a form of energy. So in survival-based eating, if you skip breakfast, you go a few hours, this is what a lot of people say to me, well, I'm just not hungry. So what happens usually 3 or 4 hours later? What happens to you when you don't eat for a few hours?
Crash out and I'm very hungry at the next meal.
And you're probably not pleasant to be around, or at least that's how I am when I get hungry, right? I get a little crabby. So then what happens? So if you haven't eaten in a long time and you're feeling that way, then you're going to just scarf down probably almost anything in front of you and probably too much of it, right? Because you've gone past that hunger point. So when you start off in the morning and you don't have enough glucose in your body goes into a little bit of panic mode. Going back to thousands of years ago, your body thinks there might not be a food source available to me. So unfortunately, it has the opposite impact that most of us want, in that your body is going to actually pull from your muscle reserves before your fat. Your fat is the last thing your body wants to give up because it's so precious. So if you started your morning with nothing to eat, you might think you're doing yourself a favor and you might lose a little weight where you're actually not, because your body's going to pull right from that muscle mass. And I already told you, you're going to lose 10% of your muscle mass if you're not counteracting that. So this isn't going to help that. Well, the opposite happens when you eat too much. When you get too much glucose in your body can't use it all, so it goes right into your fat stores. So it's the cycle that so many of us have gotten into with what we call survival-based eating. So the flip side of that is more strategic or opportunity-based eating. And it's keeping that glucose level very consistent throughout the day. So you eat breakfast. Do you typically eat a snack in the morning before you have lunch?
Not very often. I usually give myself a little boost with some caffeine, coffee or tea.
Yeah, which is very common. It's what a lot of people do. So something you might want to think about to help improve your energy levels is to eat a little more consistently. So we just frankly call it eating light and eating often. And rule of thumb is you really don't want to go more than 4 hours without having something in your body, because again, your body starts to run out of that glucose and it's going to look for it. So if you can keep that consistent level, it's also going to keep you from eating as much. So you might not end up eating as much at your meals. But what you want to do is try to have 2 or 3 meals throughout the day, but the most important thing is to intersperse that with snacks to keep that glucose level consistent.
I like snacks.
You like snacks? Good. Okay, well, we'll talk about snacks. So when you're looking at your meals, the first thing you want to think about is, and really in its simplest form, we call it looking at your plate like a peace sign. And it's trying to get at portions. and what kind of portions should you be eating. And a great measurement, I love this, especially people who travel, maybe people who struggle with this idea of portion control, is to use the palm of your hand as a measurement tool. And it's great because it's always with you, right? So this idea of, if you're looking at your plate, it's a peace sign plate, you want it to be 40% fruits and vegetables, 40% grains, and 20% protein. So one serving of protein, which is going to be your 20%, is usually about the size of your palm. And you'll notice the size of your palm is probably different from the size of my palm. That's because we're different sizes, right? So you obviously have a different nutritional needs than I do in terms of quantity. But if you're eating a piece of fish or a piece of meat, this is about what you're looking for a portion. And I think that's a lot smaller than what most people would think. The average hamburger probably isn't that big, right? So you can use the same thing then in measuring your fruits and vegetables and your grains, and you're just going to do 2 handfuls. So same thing, fruits and vegetables. I know it's not always easy. You can't necessarily put your hand in the bowl, especially if you're out in public, but it gives you a pretty good visual of what kind of measurement you should be using. So those are your main meals, and then interspersed. Do you have a question?
Oh, I was going to ask. So, would you have the equal amounts for breakfast, lunch, and dinner? So
not necessarily. You can. In an ideal world, that would be great. We don't all live in an ideal world, right? So part of being strategic about what you eat is looking at your day, if you can. If you get up in the morning and you see, wow, I am back-to-back meetings all day, I know I can start with that good breakfast now, right? So you can definitely have that for breakfast. But, wow, I don't think I'm going to actually have lunch, the opportunity to have a lunch until maybe 3 o'clock this afternoon. That can happen. That's probably not that unusual. If that's the case, then you want to work in your snacks. So you've had breakfast, you want to go no more than 4 hours until you have your first snack. And typically a snack is going to get you, again, it's not the size of a meal, so you're going to have less calories. A snack should be about 100 to 150 calories. And a snack should get you about 1 or 2 hours. So that's where the strategic part comes in. You might find that you need to actually eat 2 or 3 snacks before you can have your next meal. It really depends on your schedule. In an ideal world, 3 meals, 1 or 2 snacks in between would be perfect. But that gives you the flexibility. But part of that then is knowing in advance that you need those snacks. And personally, that's something I do. I travel a lot, so I keep a bag of snacks with me at all times. And your snacks really are going to also depend on what kind of activity level you're expecting later in the day. So if you need more energy, if you're expecting to have a workout, you might eat something that's going to give you more quick energy versus something that you might want to have to sustain you longer, and that's going to be working in something more like a little more fat or a little more protein that's going to last a little bit longer.
Okay, excellent.
So then we talked about food. Well, the second part of building this foundation is movement. And I think we all know we should be doing more. Probably for the most part, most of us just don't get the kind of exercise that we really need. But it's really the foundation for all of the engagement, really in all of the areas, is getting just more movement. And again, as I said, after the age of 30, you need to factor even that much more. But what you want to be thinking about is this idea, and it's kind of counterintuitive until you really get into working out and exercising, is this idea that by moving, you can actually give yourself more energy. And I think sometimes at the end of a long day, it's the last thing you want to do. But when you can force yourself to do it, and even if it's just a walk, maybe it's walking a couple of flights of stairs, you get those endorphins, and it actually gives you a little bit more energy. So just focusing on getting the right kind of energy that you need throughout the day, really just through movement. And what we need movement for really is to help with energy to all parts of our body, because movement is going to help move the oxygen and the glucose that I talked about to get that to your body, and just as importantly, to get it to your brain. There's a lot of impact that you'll feel when you sit too long during the workday, perhaps, when you might have an important meeting or something you need to focus on. Well, if you've been sitting too long, it's going to be harder for you to concentrate because you're not actually getting that blood flow to get the oxygen and the glucose to your brain. So movement's really important to help you with your mental energy as well as your physical energy. So one of the things, in fact, I'm going to have you look at this picture if you don't mind. It's not a test. I'll just have you look at the picture. Does that make you think she's getting the benefits of exercise that she needs?
I don't think so.
Probably
Doesn't
not.
look very intense at all.
Now, getting yourself to the gym, yes, can be the first step, but really what's important is intensity, and it's really just getting your heart rate up. So a couple rules of thumb on that. Frankly, if you can have a conversation, a cell phone conversation, if you can read a magazine or a book while you're doing cardio, you're probably not going to be getting the kind of intensity that you need. You need to push yourself outside of that comfort zone, to feel a little discomfort in order to truly get the benefits.
Okay.
So how do you put this in place? I talk to a lot of people about this. I don't think anything I've told you has been necessarily earth-shattering, but I think the struggle most people have is, I know I need to eat right, I know I need to exercise more. How do I actually do it? How do I motivate myself to do it? And really that gets at what I had talked about at the top of that pyramid, the spiritual energy. And all that means is finding what your purpose is. And so it could be as deep as, I want to be healthy because I want to live as long as possible to see my grandchildren grow up. That might be your motivation. For some people, that's what's going to motivate them to start exercising, to start eating right. It could also be on a daily basis, finding something that's going to get me out of bed this morning. I might want to sleep in, but I know I need to come here and do this with you, and I want to make sure that I'm fully focused, I'm fully engaged, and if I sleep in and I don't get my exercise, or I had too much to eat last night, or maybe one too many cocktails last night, I might not be in the shape I need to be in to be able to give you the energy that you're needing from me today. So knowing that you've got maybe a business trip, you've been traveling for several days, you're going to come home to your family, come home to your spouse, what are you doing? What are those choices that you're making to help you get to where you can actually manage your energy and give the people who are most important to you the energy that you know that they deserve. So that's really the top level. That's kind of the process that we take people through in this program.
Excellent. That's really very interesting, very good stuff, Rana. Anything else?
Nope.
Okay, great. Rana, could you tell us a little bit about the material and the workbook that goes along with the Energy for Performance?
Absolutely. So we have a lot of resources available. In this workbook, we have an assessment that we'll let people take, and it's really the first step is to go ahead and take the assessment and find out where they are in their physical energy and all of the elements that I talked about in terms of energy. Because really, once you know which aspect, whether it's physical, mental, emotional, or spiritual, that you're really most lacking in, then you can decide what could be your action plan. So taking the assessment would be the first step. And then in the workbook, we have information on all of these areas. So some tips, some rituals, as I talked about, some things that you could put into place to get you started on your way. And then putting that, we actually have a training log in there where you can keep track of the things that you've said you want to work on, and then measure yourself in order to be able to get there. Because remember, we talked about this with elite athletes. It's the idea of being able to measure your energy and measure your performance. So we want to make sure we're giving you the tools to do that as well.
Good. That sounds great. Thank you, Rana and Janus Labs, for sharing your knowledge. Please contact my office for Energy for Performance workbook to help you develop a personalized training program. Thank you again.
Thank you.